This is Amy Borgens. She was appointed the State Marine Archeologist at Texas Historical Commission in June of 2010. She earned a bachelor's degree in fine arts from Purdue University and received her master's degree from Nautical Archaeological Program, Department of Anthropology at Texas A&M University. She is currently a doctoral candidate in the Department of Geography at Texas State University. As a state marine archaeologist, Ms. Borgens is responsible for the preservation, the protection, and the investigation of shipwrecks and other submerged sites in all the state-owned waters. Prior to her employment at THC, she worked in cultural resource management and at the Conservation Research Laboratory at TAMU. Ms. Borgens has worked in the field of Texas maritime archaeology since 1997 and has been associated with several notable shipwreck projects, including LaBelle. And if you know anything about the LaBelle, there's some excellent stuff out there. They did some amazing things with the salvage of that wreck. And we have a YouTube video on it, and I think there's also one that's done by National Geographic, I believe, to this day. But I know ours exists. And the USS Westfield, and that was in 1863. LaBelle was in 1686. In addition, she assisted in the excavation of Oklahoma's only shipwreck archaeological site, Heroin, from 1838, and the investigations of early 1900 shipwrecks at depths exceeding 4,000 feet off the coast of Louisiana, the Mardi Gras, and the Monterey shipwreck projects. Collectively, she has worked on sites dating from the Byzantine period to the mid-20th century in Louisiana, Oklahoma, Texas, Canada, Turkey, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Falkland Islands. Her experience in the field of archaeology includes shipwreck surveys, wreck excavation and documentation, conservation, artifact photography, which she'll be doing some of tomorrow, and illustration. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
Part of the work I do at the Texas Historical Commission is a lot of times that's regulatory work. So I'm involved in making sure construction projects that occur in the water don't impact archaeological sites. And so a lot of time I'm reading construction projects, determining if there's archaeology that we know about that's there, or if there's a need for a survey. So kind of the main hat I wear at work is doing these project reviews, issuing permits, and then reading the reports that are generated and presented to me. But this program that I'm in, the Marine Archaeology program at the Texas Historical Commission, began in 1972. And so in addition to doing this kind of regulatory work, we do our own investigative projects as well. So, and today I'm just going to talk about some of the local wrecks to Aransas Pass and Corpus Christi. So the coastal bend is 9 counties, of which 6 of these are coastal counties or bay-facing counties. And not to go over an entire settlement history of this region, but one of the earliest town sites that was created is El Covino. And this actually was a really popular area for bringing in not only contraband, but supplies during the Texas Revolution. But also Corpus Christi in 1839, Port Aransas in 1850, Ingleside in 1854, and Rockport in 1865. And if you're sort of surprised by all these sort of mid-century dates for all these town site creations, a lot of the Anglo immigration into Texas really began during the Texas Revolution. In those months coming up the Revolution, but during the Texas Revolution, and especially after statehood. So a lot of settlement in the coastal areas during the mid-19th century. So when we look at reported shipwrecks for this area, the Texas Historical Commission has a database that we've compiled. This database was begun in 1972.
It summarizes all the shipwrecks that we think may exist in state waters from reported, these are mostly reported wrecks from primary and secondary sources such as life-saving station records, navigational maps, diaries, newspaper accounts. And so right now, we're up to 1,909 of these reported wrecks, of which 1,500 are in coastal areas. And then included within that are about 191 archaeological sites and 13 that are in Louisiana. Sometimes I claim those because those wrecks were actually built in Texas, but they wrecked on the Louisiana side. So about 10% of that database is comprised of archaeological sites that have been recorded, some before our agency began, like some in the 1960s. So in kind of breaking down these reported sites and archaeological, like reported wrecks and archaeological sites, Cameron County has 181 of those, or sorry, Coastal Bend. Calhoun, Matagorda 239. Galveston is the lion's share of reported wrecks and archaeological sites in the coastal area. And then with Jefferson and Orange having 126. And then when you look at the quantity of those that are recorded archaeological sites, so see, like the Coastal Bend's 12%. And today I'm talking predominantly about the sites in these three counties. But the Coastal Bend has 19 recorded archaeological sites. And then, as you might expect, Galveston has 49. So again, the largest proportion is Galveston, and then Jefferson and Orange have a large number of wrecks because of the World War I shipbuilding industry there and the abandonments that went with those constructed ships when the war ended. So just to kind of go through the metrics, in general, I think right now the state of Texas, I want to say I think we have over 86,000 recorded archaeological sites. And so when you think that we only nearly have 200 shipwrecks, those are extremely rare. Shipwreck sites are. But many of these sites are discovered as work is done to clear areas ahead of construction. And so a lot of times when you find archaeological sites, they're more often located in like urbanized areas where there's construction and stuff like that. But one thing I did want to mention was that one of the shipwrecks I'm not talking about today, and I'm going to apologize for this, but the oldest shipwreck archaeological sites that are recorded in the United States are the 1554 shipwrecks, and one of those is here in Kennedy County. And I won't be discussing that one today, but I sort of realized ahead of the talk that the shipwreck archaeology of the Coastal Bend goes from 1554 to World War II. And that's almost the largest span of shipwreck archaeology. It represents pretty much the largest span of shipwreck archaeology in the entire Texas coast, as here in the Coastal Bend. So I'm just going to kind of give you a snapshot of the archaeological sites that we have in the Coastal Bend, and particularly in Aransas and Nueces counties. And I'm just going to work chronologically from the 19th century onward into the 20th century. And some of these shipwreck sites we do not have a lot of information from or on. And for those of you that are local, I would love to hear more about them from you, as some of these have been dived on locally for decades. And some of these wrecks I only know through archival research. And so I'm just going to kind of give you, again, a snapshot of shipwreck archaeology related to Aransas Pass and the coast here. So this shipwreck was discovered after Hurricane Carla exposed it in 1961. And you're going to see thematically this happens a lot. Like a lot of the shipwreck sites that are on the beach we know about because they were exposed after hurricanes or northers. And so folks started uncovering this. This is near Packery Channel. And what you're seeing here is a Washington press. And this Washington press helped identify the site. The Texas Historical Commission has never seen this site. So this is all known from archival research that was forwarded to me by another archaeologist doing research, found this information. So this vessel was identified through the printing press. It was being carried on the ship as cargo by printer E. Percy Howell. So this was uncovered in '61. The printing press helped identify the wreck. His family was immigrating here, and this printing press represented his work and his livelihood. And he was bound from New Orleans to Padre Island on February 5th, 1853. So depending on the account that you read, there was a conspiracy related to this shipwreck loss, was that the captain himself wanted to profit from the cargo and deliberately ran it, or didn't, he made passage in a storm. The family took off and traveled. They left their son there to kind of watch the cargo on the ship, and that they sent the son away as a distraction. And then while the son was gone, they hacked holes in the bottom of the ship to deliberately sink it. And then the captain ended up selling the cargo for a profit in Corpus Christi. And I don't know if that's 100% true, but that is a rumor that has followed the loss for this wreck, like the story of the loss, and Howe himself died of yellow fever the following year. So just a really, really tragic story in general. One of my favorite archaeological sites is another shipwreck that's on the beach, and it's an anti-torpedo raft. So what are torpedoes? During the Civil Wars, this is essentially an underwater mine, and most folks know it from the Battle of Mobile Bay, the Damn the Torpedoes line. And so USS Tecumseh was sunk during the Battle of Mobile Bay, as were 8 other vessels from the Union fleet. And ahead of the Battle of Mobile Bay, mines were also used successfully to sink the USS Cairo in the Yazoo River, December 12, 1862, and also the Commodore Barney in the James River in 1863. And this is a fantastic image from South Carolina in 1863, and you can see in the foreground 2 different types of mines that were employed against Union warships during the war. So these mines were experimental, and they began investigating the use of these in 1861, mining the James River in 1862. The barrel torpedo type was introduced in late 1862, and a total of 58 Union vessels were destroyed by these mines, these torpedoes, by the end of the war. So these are some images of what these look like. And if you're asking yourself, well, did the Union try to do anything about this if they're so terrified about these mines and the potential loss of their monitors and their other vessels? Yes, they did. John Erickson, who also designed the ironclad USS Monitor, came up with an obstruction remover called a boot jack that was essentially a heavily built wooden raft that was made to attach to the bow of an ironclad. So this was designed by Erickson, who's a Swedish-American architect, in 1863 and built in New York. These were approximately 50 by 27 feet wide. And you can see that, let's see, I know I was given a laser pointer, but you can see here this little V-notch so that it could attach to the bow of a ship. And in the front of this, it had grappling hooks so that essentially it could capture these mines underneath and then detonate them under this big, large, heavy wooden raft. So 4 of these were made, these 4 prototypes, and they were all carried down to, transported to Charleston on January 30th, 1863, but on the way, 3 of them were lost at sea. And one of those drifted ashore to Bermuda, and they were this remaining one was first employed in action on April 7th on the Monitor USS Weehawken. So these are Civil War era images of the Weehawken, and then again, that raft as it would have affixed to the front and as it was joined to it. But unfortunately, it was not favored. You know, I guess that it just kept kind of abutting the ship, and it was considered in rough seas really uncomfortable. And so they just cut it loose and let it drift ashore to Morris Island. So we're talking about 4 of these that were made, 3 that got lost, and then the remaining one was not considered successful in deployment, so they just released it. So how many archaeological sites do we have for these? We have the one in Bermuda, the Weehawken raft that's in South Carolina. And when this arrived in Bermuda, it was still fairly intact. It was still its original size. The one in Weehawken, the Weehawken raft in Morris Island, and these images were sent to me by the state marine archaeologist, state underwater archaeologist of South Carolina. So that's, in 2010, was about 12.5 by 5.5 feet. And then we have the one here on Mustang Island. And to me, this is really remarkable. And that one image I showed you earlier, that little plastic, that's a gaming piece. And for me to have only 4 of these ever made, but they're such a unique novelty that folks are making gaming pieces for this really rare device that was never really used. So this one on Mustang Island was uncovered by Hurricane Allen in 1980, but it had been known locally for years. And there was an archaeological project that was a cooperative project between the Corpus Christi Museum of Science and History and the Institute of Nautical Archaeology. And this is, to me, if you had seen this on the beach, to most folks this would not have really have been recognizable as an archaeological site, but massively built with massive fasteners, and the largest portion of the raft here on Mustang Island is 38 by 35 feet, or the site dimensions. And so these are some color images. And one of the things that, with this dissertation that I'm doing at Texas State University, I'm actually looking at shoreline loss and how it's impacting some of these archaeological sites. And we have too many for me to do the entire Texas coast, but we haven't had this shipwreck reported to us in decades. And what I'm really, we have so much shoreline loss in Texas. The Texas coast is 80% erosional, and at the state level, we're losing a little over 4 feet a year on average, but some areas, like Brazos Island, we're losing about 8 feet a year down there. Some areas, it's more like 20 feet. Pascavallo, there's some areas there that's 60 feet, a linear regression a year. And so sometimes I feel like when we're not seeing these wrecks and they're not being reported to us, they may have been reburied in the dunes, but it also may be that the shoreline has eroded and they're underwater now and not on the beach. But if anyone sees anything on the beach that they think is a shipwreck, I am that person that you call. And I just drove down to Sargent last week on a Monday because we got a report of such an event. And folks were trying to recover that, and you don't recover them. You contact us and we study them. So this is just a diagram of part of the site, and Tom Ortling made this model to kind of represent how this was connected to a monitor. So the SS Reindeer, and this is some of the artifacts that you're seeing here today that are on display on the table. And so when Cliff originally contacted me about these artifacts that are being repatriated in Texas, and he sent me this email and he said, well, they're from Baddacock. And I'm like, okay, I know that one. They're from SS Mary. I know that shipwreck. And then he says, Reindeer. I'm like, well, we don't have a reindeer. You know, we have a reindeer in our database, but we don't actually have reindeer as an archaeological site. And I was like, are they getting it confused with something else? We have another site in the channel or, that could be Dayton. But it ends up that this was an archaeological site that had just never been brought to the attention of the agency. And so the Reindeer has a very unique history. It was built in Greenwich, England in 1863 as the Lady of Lion. And it operated as the blockade runner Siren off the East Coast and made 33 trips before it was captured. This makes it the most successful blockade runner of the Civil War. It operated in the Gulf between Pensacola, New Orleans, and Texas before it's lost in 1870. So it got captured, it was sold by the U.S. Marshal's Office, entered commercial service, regular commercial service, and then operated in the Gulf. But it seems like at the end of its life, predominantly a lot in Texas, but also between Mobile and Texas, and just kind of all the major and minor ports. Lost under suspicious circumstances in January of 1870. So there was shipping competition back then. And the rumor is that Charles Morgan, who was a major shipping magnate at that time, had one of his pilots put on the vessel to help guide it in, and it ran it aground to take it out of service. And then he hired that gentleman to work on one of his other vessels. So divers discovered the shipwreck in 1959, and these articles were printed in the Corpus Christi, I want to say Times. I forget when it turned into the Times Caller Times, but it was, and we have a copy of that article, and they describe it as having the paddle wheel, that you could see one of the paddle wheels, that the name was on the bow, and but we had that article, but my predecessor thought it was sensationalized journalism, and part of that was because in our records we had it as a schooner and not as a steamship, but it could have been a schooner-rigged steamship, which is a point brought to my attention by Bob Gerhardt, who's standing in this room, so I'll give him, sorry. He's my former boss, And he was involved in some of these projects, so not to embarrass you, Bob. Sorry. And then the artifacts were recovered by divers in the early to mid-1970s. So this is one of the original accounts. I've been digging and digging to try to find original accounts. The Reindeer lies a hopeless wreck on the Aransas bar and has been abandoned. After numerous ineffectual attempts to get her off, she struck very heavily on the bar and thumped so hard that she dislocated her blow-off pipe. If proper appliances had been on hand, she could easily have been hauled off. And then these are the shipwrecks from articles from 1959. And I thought this was interesting. We stated last week that the cargo off Reindeer was partially saved. We were in error. It was a total loss, vessel and cargo both. We make this correction by request. Now, I went through the Galveston Flakes Daily Bulletin for the week before, just looking for this article. I have not found it yet. But we do have artifacts that were salvaged off of it. Peter Benson had a sale. He salvaged the wreck. He put a couple of guards on duty to help protect it so that the artifacts, or the objects, artifacts now, but the objects wouldn't be stolen. And this document here, the Center for American History in Austin has a Xerox of the original documents that are in the Corpus Christi Public Library, I think. Is that? Seen it? Yeah, La Retama. But it's the same, this Xerox of what's in the La Retama collection is the exact same sign that you see here on this artifact on the table. So these are examples of the items that were sold at the Wreckmaster sale. So this is a little bit of a summary, but 58 barrels of whiskey, or bitters, sorry, which are heavily alcohol infused, 7 barrels of whiskey, 7 barrels of wine, and some of the reporting says that some of the soldiers that were guarding the bitters actually kept some, but you also see kerosene oil, candles, cherries, peaches, scrubbing brushes. Like, I really often love to look at lists of items that have been salvaged off of shipwrecks, because a lot of people always assume that shipwrecks carry treasure, but most of the time it's not. It's just mundane, regular products that we use every day. These are not artifacts from the shipwrecks, but these are different examples of the brands of bitters and the schnapps that were carried on the vessel. And I thought this was cool. I looked into condensed milk, because I'm like, what condensed milk was being used at this point just after the Civil War? It was Borden's. Borden's was designed or developed in 1853, but really took off during the Civil War because it was bought for the soldiers, and then it gained a lot of popularity. And Borden was the main brand that was making condensed milk at that time. But my name's Borgens, and it used to get confused with Borden when I was a kid, and I had a teacher named Duncan. So people used to be Borden milk, Dunkin' Donuts, but yeah, it was. So I have this relationship with Borden's milk. So what's interesting about the Reindeer is when I started looking into our records and we had coordinates that had provided by one of the divers, it ended up that the site of the wreck that he had dived on had already been discovered in 2019 by Bob Hydrographics. And so the shout out is to Bob, who's in the back corner there. This is his sonar image of Reindeer, and the circumstantial evidence and the coordinates that we were provided were so great. I don't think that this shipwreck can be anything other than Reindeer. And so one of the things I'll show you here, this is archaeological site number, is this is its enrollment and registration length at 165 feet by 24. So this vessel is only 136 feet long, but it's damaged. You see how it's missing an end? Let's put that there. And Bob actually mentioned in his report that this was 75% of the vessel, that part of it was missing. And as for, and this is something else, if you can read this handwriting, we wish you to dispose of the steamer Reindeer tackle as soon as convenient as the point is cutting away and we have to keep hauling the chains and other articles away, you see, every few days further back. And so I think they're actually cutting into this vessel, and I think that's why you're missing part of the bow, as they're trying to get into the anchor chain and the other tackle that would have been below depths. And as for the width of the vessel, the enrollment dimension's 24, but the 24-foot length or width wouldn't have included the paddle wheels. And we know from 1959 that the paddle wheel, they also described a pipe as going through the middle of the wreck. I'm pretty sure that was the paddle wheel shaft. and I'm pretty sure you can see them right here. And so that extra width of this shipwreck is actually the width with that one paddle wheel. And then you're also seeing here what I believe to be 2 boilers. And if this is the conventional looking Civil War blockade runner, you would have had, that image I showed you in the beginning wasn't a Reindeer, it was kind of more of a typical Civil War vessel, but you would have 2 steam stacks and then a boiler for each steam stack. So this archaeological site heavily aligns to what we would expect for a Civil War blockade runner, but also what we learned about the wrecking event and its salvage. So SS Mary, we already mentioned Charles Morgan. This is an image of a similar Charles Morgan's vessel that may be a little bit more accurate as to what these sort of Civil War, post-Civil War steamships may have looked like. It was built in 1866 in Wilmington, Delaware by Harlan and Hollingsworth, a little over 234 feet long, with a cargo capacity of 1,996 tons. It sank on the outer bar at Aransas Pass in November 30th of 1876 during a norther with no loss of life. And the cargoes often included livestock and, again, other sundries as well. And I did not know Cliff's story about all the Christmas presents that were brought on that vessel having been lost. So to my knowledge, the first investigation of SS Mary as an archaeological site occurred in 1987 by the Texas Antiquities Committee. That's what we used to be before we became the THC, and the Southwest Underwater Archaeological Society. And this was done also with Bob Gearhart and other archaeologists at SB Houston Associations in 87, and that was a magnetometer survey, a sonar survey, but there was also an ROV survey that they were experimenting with at the same time. And usually an ROV isn't a successful method in the Gulf because the visibility is so poor, and they were saying that in the brief moment that they could see something in the ROV footage, they thought they saw part of a burlap bag, and Bardo Arnold was drawing attention to the fact that this was carrying a cargo of grain as well when it sank. And the nice thing about shipwreck sites is if a wreck sinks, if a ship sinks and it gets embedded in the sediment, that oxygen-free environment can really preserve organics, wood, and there was brain matter that was preserved on LaBelle. And so it just, leather, like that stuff really holds up well on underwater sites over time and be conserved, but not so much in land archaeology. So because of the ship channel modification projects, SB Houston and Associates dived on it in '89, and then there was detailed mapping and some artifact recovery in 1993 by the company Coastal Environments. And again, this is all in preparation for modification of the channel. And there was a new survey conducted in 2020 and 2021. And so some of those channel projects, those channel modification projects, kind of got backburnered for a while. And those are coming back, and so we're seeing new surveys of these channels. So part of what was mapped by Coastal Environments in 1993 was part of that walking beam engine. But you can see from the site map down here, this is a metal hulled wreck, and it's in several pieces all along the seafloor. And Bardo Arnold, the state marine archaeologist from 1975 to 1996, spoke to someone that thought that this had partially been salvaged in the 1940s. This is not the best image of the sonar target, but above, but an image of the hull, the bow section. And then this is a bathymetric data that sort of shows what that shipwreck looks like now. And bathymetric data isn't the best at presenting what a shipwreck looks like. Normally that's side scan sonar, but this is recent imagery produced by NOAA. At the time of discovery, it was only the second oldest ocean-going metal-hulled steamship recorded in state waters. And again, the largest section is about 29 by 10 feet. And the forward, it's sort of the forward 2/3 of the lower hull are intact. And right now, we're sort of currently re-inventorying this project. And I forgot to look, I think we had about 69 objects that were recovered by coastal environments, and you see this artifact description as a conglomerate. So there's usually, as iron objects degrade, it forms kind of a coating around that object, mixed in with the sand and the shell and everything that's sort of in that ecosystem, and that will coat everything near that iron object. And so often when you have a conglomerate, when you conserve that, there's multiple artifacts in there. So we're up to about 120 artifacts, excluding the SS Mary porthole that you see here on the table. And I'm almost done with re-inventorying that collection from the SS Mary. And a lot of shell casings. So one of the most tragic, and this is actually one of my favorite stories, is the story of Lake Austin. And to give Cliff a shout out, he knows a whole lot more about the stories of some of these ships than I do. So,
Do we have any front guests here tonight? Their family actually bought the cargo and built the house from the cargo, which was lumber and I guess there were shingles on board also.
yeah, I don't know what I know it was predominantly lumber. Yeah.
I knew there was lumber, but so they bought it, and that house actually was moved to a location pretty close to where the swimming pool is called Aransas Pass Jetties. And then the new owner of the property, after Harvey had some damage, we tried to get him to let us move it. We're ready to try to get him to let them move it, or get some wood. And it wasn't comfortable situation. So it ended up getting demolished.
Yeah.
That house lasted quite a long time, built out of cargo from the shipwreck.
Well, and the story of that house kind of parallels the story of the shipwreck because, and we don't have images of Lake Austin. Lake Austin was a Gulf centerboard scow schooner, a really popular fishing and cargo carrying vessel at that time. So this is a similar vessel, the type of vessel that we're looking at. So it was built in 1881 in Matagorda Bay, just about 60 feet long, 56 tons, frequently traveled between Port Isabel and Galveston. And we have an account of ships trying to come to the rescue after the hurricane at Galveston in 1900, and this ship is among, at least the name of a ship named Lake Austin is among the vessels that came to Galveston after that horrible hurricane. More images of similar scow schooners. So while off the Brazos River on November 3rd, 1903, it encounters a Texas norther, and it was started to take on water. It was an older vessel by this time, and so they ran it aground to keep it from outright sinking. And it's beached near Port Aransas, and it was very sensationalized in the news. And then in 1966, and it was salvaged, and at the time the cargo was salvaged and sold, and it reappeared again in 1966. And originally, when it started eroding out of the beach and people started digging it out and excavating it out, people often think that when, and I see this all the time, that when a ship erodes out of the beach in Texas, it's either a Spanish galleon, a pirate ship, or something from the Civil War. And this was none of the above, but it stirs up a lot of interest and people get really engaged. And these black and white images are actually from the Port Aransas Museum. And I heard a rumor that when this was dug out of the beach, that it was pumped out, that it could actually sort of float on its own accord. But again, this predates me. I don't know if that's the truth. These are images from our collection. And but in the second day of doing work, they found the registration number on the ship, and they were able to identify it as Lake Austin. And if you see in this little corner right here, you can actually see they put a sign up there. Let me see. Where is that sign? Oh, there it is. All right, it's right above me. And they intended to try to make a display out of this. And one of the important things about shipwreck archaeology is ships are made of wood. And if anyone has seen what happens to a wooden vessel or any kind of wood when it dries out, it warps. And when you're dealing with waterlogged artifacts, a ship being a very large artifact, you should never remove it from the water, remove it from its safe environment until you have a conservation plan and a curation plan. Where do you put that ship? A 60-foot ship. Well, they had neither, a plan for neither. And 2 months later, it was burned on the beach as a beach hazard. And 2 months Like, to my knowledge, this is the most intact Gulf centerboard schooner that's ever been discovered in the Gulf of Mexico. And when shipwrecks wreck in saltwater, and they're in the saltwater environment, there's a mollusk that consumes wood. So, like, if you guys go to see La Belle at the Bullock Texas State History Museum, you're only looking at the lower third of the hull because it sank and it got embedded in Matagorda Bay mud, essentially. And so if a shipwreck is in mud, a nice soft anaerobic environment, if it's on the beach and it's protected by beach sand, you can get absolutely amazing preservation of a ship hull. And first time I heard about this shipwreck was my predecessor, Steve Hoyt, at a conference giving a talk about this to a whole bunch of underwater archaeologists. And when he showed them that the ship had been burned, you could hear this audible gasp in the entire room, and you could hear like a pin drop, and I was just sitting at the back, and it was just amazing to have the loss of this kind of history. So 51 years later, Hurricane Harvey strikes Port Aransas and Rockport, and with tremendous destruction. And I have an image here, a little bitty image of the Burdett House. Is that how you pronounce that name? Brundett House. So this is the house that was built out of the timbers that were salvaged from Lake Austin. And so although these things may have met their fate during the hurricane and afterwards, one neat little ship did not. And this is the Lydia Ann. And this is still in production and created by Farley Boat Works. And this is actually how I got introduced to the Port Aransas Museum and Farley Boat Works on a first-name basis. Was this shipwreck is based on Howard Chappell, famous maritime historian and architect, but his drawings of a Gulf centerboard schooner, but they were interested in our images, which we shared, so that this boat is sort of a composite of their photography, our photography, and kind of what's historically known of centerboard schooners. And so I just thought that was just a fascinating story in a way. And when you look at Lake Austin and how it came to the aid of hurricane survivors in 1900, and then it sank in a storm, and then it sort of lived on through its timbers, and then the production of this replica, so to speak, and that replica was spared from the hurricane. Yeah. So another shipwreck that I only know about from newspaper accounts, I've called it the Bob Hall Pier wreck, and that's because when you look at it in the newspaper, it's always referenced by its distance from Bob Hall Pier, which changes in every article. I've seen 3 different mileages in these articles, but this is another shipwreck that was uncovered by Hurricane Carla in 1961. Again, you're going to see a common denominator here from when we learn about these wrecks. In 1967, locals attempted to partially excavate it, and they pursued the Texas General Land Office for a claim. So the antiquities law that protects history and archaeology and archaeological sites like this wreck, that was enacted in 1969. And so the fate of this wreck, and like the Lake Austin before it, we didn't have the laws then that we have now to try to protect those sites. So Texas State Historical Survey Commission, that was another name for our agency. Like, there was the Texas State Historical Survey Commission that got shortened to the Texas Historical Commission, Texas Antiquities Committee, and that all got melded together in 1995. So Curtis Tunnell made a visit to the site at the time it was discovered, but by the time he got there, it was buried. So he never saw the site, and there's a really odd article where he's talking about this shipwreck, and he's saying, it is not special, it is not unique. That really confused me, because they're talking about faunal remains and silver oxide. They also think that this is a Spanish galleon. And I talked to folks at work about this, and they thought that he may have deliberately told the newspapers that it wasn't significant to keep people from trying to dig it up and loot it and steal things and damage the wreck. Because often wrecks don't contain things of monetary value, but that mythology causes people to damage these sites looking for stuff. And so I think he was just trying to get ahead of that. And to my knowledge, this claim never went through. The wreck was reburied, and we have not heard about it since that time. And this is another wreck where I'm just wondering, if you see the proximity to the beach in 67, I'm just wondering if this is underwater now. So I'm going to move on to the 20th century and talk about some of the shipwrecks that we have for that period, and these are associated with World War I and World War II. So during the First World War, there were so many Allied shipping losses that there was this huge building program to try to create a fleet of wooden ships. And so the U.S. Shipping Board was established on September 7th, 1916, to build this bridge of ships. And after the U.S. entered the war, the Emergency Fleet Corporation was incorporated to help own and build and operate. And oftentimes, in wartime, there's metal shortages. And so for this reason, wood was selected as one of the main building materials, building fabrics for this new fleet. And so the Division of Wooden and Composite Ship Construction was created in December of 1917. And a year later, this was producing one ship a day. By 1918, the U.S. was the leading nation for shipbuilding in the world. So the Gulf District, and are any of y'all from East Texas? I'm originally from East Texas. The pine industry there, this became a huge area for the construction of these ships. So the main shipbuilding locations for this Gulf District of these wooden ships was Rockport, Houston, Beaumont, Orange, and Morgan City in Louisiana. And if you can see this little newspaper article in the upper left, yeah, so Beaumont, all new shipyards, because by the early 20th century, building massive ships of wood was a lost art. And so some of these shipyards were created and had to find staff to be able to make wooden ships. But see this right here, your firm has never constructed ships, but there was money to be made and it inspired a whole industry. And if I'm remembering correctly, there weren't even, there were so many people, this became such an industry in that area that there wasn't even the ability to house everyone in Orange. I think that they had people living in Port Arthur, so it was just a tremendous workforce, lots of ships being built in these areas. And then the war ended, and then a lot of these ships were unfinished, and they didn't have, it was kind of hard to sell a wooden hull in the early 20th century with an engine that was outmoded by that time. So 88 sawmills within 100 miles of Beaumont, 8 million feet of lumber per day. The largest quantity was being used in shipbuilding. And this sort of led to deforestation of the pine in that area. So the most popular ship built at that point in time was the Ferris type vessel. And these are some of the razzle-dazzle patterns that they were painted with to try to confuse the submarines so that they wouldn't torpedo them. So the overall length of the Ferris-class vessel was 281 feet, 268 feet between perpendiculars. And a lot of the remnants of these vessels that we have in Texas, when you look at them as archaeological sites, they're often in that kind of 260-foot length spectrum because they were often burned down to the waterline. So you're just looking at the bottom of the hull. But to me, that's still massive, a 260-foot long wooden archaeological site. Just over 1.5 million linear feet of lumber for each one. So that was 80% of the contracts. So the cost of a wooden ship averaged $676,000. The Beaumont vessels sold for $1,000 each in 1924. There just wasn't a market for these. And in many cases, some of the completed hulls were converted to barges, and some of these were just bought for $1,000 each and then sold for their lumber and timber that people, and some of the fires were supposedly caused by accidents occurred as some of these items were being cut off and removed. So in summary, we have 43 of these Emergency Fleet Corporation shipwrecks in Texas and in the Louisiana Sabine. Again, these were made in Beaumont, so I'm just going to claim them for us. And so where is the archaeology for these wrecks? We have 23 in Beaumont, and we're not supposed to communicate and tell people where archaeological sites are to protect them, but if you're really paying attention, you can see some of these things in historic Google aerial photos, like the General Land Office black and white images can show some of these shipwrecks. And then we have some just south of Orange, the Texas-Louisiana border. And this image from 1999, you don't actually see the shipwrecks anymore above the waterline. Like I heard that they were pretty damaged by when Hurricane Ike went through here. But yeah, so this is nice. We don't really see them that way now. In Galveston, we have at least two. So of these Emergency Fleet Corporation, these U.S. Shipping Board vessels, a lot of them were built of wood, but we also had Selma that was built of concrete, and they also used steel. So one of the things that's kind of cool about Texas is there were three main building fabrics for these EFC vessels, and we have wrecks of all three. We have a steel hulled wreck, we have wooden wrecks, and we have the concrete vessel Selma. And then the lower image is a well-backed tanker that's also in Galveston. So how many does Port Aransas have? You have three. The first one I'm going to discuss here is Utina. This was one of 5 vessels purchased by the National Oil Company for $55,000 on April 8th, 1920. It was launched in 1919, and so in addition to the $55,000 for the hull and boilers, an extra $134,000 extra was paid to convert these to oil barges. And I think you can, I'm not expecting y'all to read this extremely fine print, but it was built in Morgan City, so one of the Gulf District vessels, and then it was towed to Beaumont, where it was sold. And there's, let me see, and you can see right there the $55,000 that it was sold for. So on its maiden voyage in November of 1920, have you guys noticed how much November has come up? It's the winter storms here. It goes adrift, and Baddacock actually retrieved it and brought it to Port Aransas, and then later went to tow it out, and then essentially the chain, the connection broke, sending Utina adrift, and then Baddacock sank as well. So, so Baddacock had sort of saved the vessel initially, and then was involved in the loss of not only Utina, but also it as well. And in total, 4 of the 5 vessels that company purchased sank before they were fully paid for. So the Utina was discovered, but not identified during a coastal environment survey in 1991. And then it was identified as the wreck of Utina in 1993, and then reevaluated by S.D. Houston Associates in 1995. And then the Volunteer Diving Group, SUAS, that partners with they used to partner with the THC, dived on it in 1995. And in a later survey in 2000-2001, and this is again NOAA bathymetric data, it was suggested that 41NU-264, that site may actually just be part of Utina, and that there's another site, 41NU-292, that might represent the main hull. And that's the site right here. So Utina could be in 2 pieces, fragmented along the jetty. But the firm that did the later work, the 2021 work, is speculating that this could be an altogether different shipwreck. And that was the Recon Offshore Survey. It's about 201 feet long. Now, Baddacock was design number 1035, built in 1920 in New York, and sank in 1920. Like, I feel like a lot of these poor ships just have I think it used to be said that shipwrecks didn't last longer, ships, like a typical ship life is no greater than 10 years. But we're seeing a lot of wrecks tonight that sort of that sank in their infancy, like right after they were launched. These are just some construction images of this tug. This is SUAS diving on it. EH&A conducted a reconnaissance survey for the THC in 1994 because they were already in the area working on Utina, and we asked them to see if they could find a target for this wreck, which they did, and then the SUAS diving group went and dived on it in 1995, confirming this is Baddacock in 2 dives in 17 feet of water. And so there's some amazing video footage that was just forwarded to me by Cliff that was taken in 2024. So this is its bathymetric data. This is what it looks like now. And this is imagery from 2024. And I just want you to know, I've been diving in Texas, I'm trying to remember when I started diving, maybe 2004, 2005, and I've never seen anything like this before, this kind of visibility that you sometimes get around Port Aransas, around the jetties, and in Lydia and Channel. Another vessel that's believed to be a potential emergency fleet corporation loss is this shipwreck we call the Firebrick wreck. And so for scale, this was discovered by a parasailer. This is the wreck right here. And this is another wreck I kind of learned about by accident. I got an email one day from someone who said, is the wreck of John Worthington in 2 pieces, or is there another shipwreck there? And it ended up that I had recently gotten the job, and the file on this wreck had been misfiled, and so I didn't know about it at the time, and it wasn't in our database. So the Firebrick wreck was recorded in 1990 by NOAA divers as an oil barge. And so when NOAA would make, when they do these remote sensing surveys in preparation, and when they're preparing and producing these navigation charts, back in the day, they used to send divers down to look at some of these anomalies they were finding. And so it was their divers that thought it might be an oil barge that was lost in 1932. And as I mismentioned, a lot of these vessels were converted to oil barges. And then it was observed by a parasailer in 2006, and then my predecessor went out with one of our staff members and dived on it at that point in time and observed a firebox, boiler, and fire bricks, one of which was made by AP Green Company of Mexico, Missouri, and circa 1915, 1920. So this brick dates to the period of the manufacture of those EFC vessels. And that's our diving in 2006, that's the brick. It was surveyed again by Coastal Environments in 2015, and Phil Barnes, is he the former director of the Texas Maritime Museum in Rockport, was given video footage of this wreck, and he was really convinced it was an emergency fleet corporation vessel. But some of this other artifact material also sort of lends evidence to that as well. And these are different. The kind of yellowy-orange image, that's a side-scan sonar image. The other two are multi-beam, kind of bathymetric remote sensing data. You remember how I was telling you that a lot of these shipwrecks are 260 feet long? Their preserve length, those are ones that are in fresh water. When you're in salt water and brackish water, you can get this mollusk consumption, so the hulls just don't have the same kind of integrity as an archaeological site, as do the ones in the Sabine and Netches. The last vessel I'm going to talk about today is John Worthington. Okay, I'm just making sure. Sometimes I talk too fast, and then I go through my stuff really quickly. And one of the things is every single one of these shipwrecks I'm talking about today is its own discussion, is its own story. I could do a presentation on every single one of these. And so I'm kind of just giving y'all a snapshot, and you are welcome to chase me down and ask more questions later. Definitely take, if it's SS Mary or Lake Austin, Cliff knows a lot about the local shipwreck. Yeah. Yeah.
Rescued people off the barrier, welcome to the Reindeer, free air raising, version of the West Indies who actually fell when they had the gangplank come across and was rescued. There's some great stories of the Worthington. A lot of people know about this. When I got here in the 70s, the bow was still sticking up out of the water.
When some of these, like one of the things that Cliff and I, we were talking about earlier, was when I was looking at the salvage records for Reindeer, the Mercer brothers were involved in that. And then Peter Benson, who was the wreck master for Reindeer, was also the wreck master for SS Mary. And one of the guys that salvaged Reindeer, one of those salvers, is the gentleman that purchased the Tarpon Inn. Yes, Frank Stevenson. Like when the original structure of the Tarpon Inn was staff housing for when they were constructing the jetty, and then he built it and turned it into a hotel, and then it was purchased again and turned into the Tarpon Inn. So it's really neat reading about all this history because it really connects you to the community and the people that are here. And I'm actually from East Texas and Dallas, so I'm having to learn some of this myself as I go. Well, so John Worthington is one of 2 torpedoed watercraft that we have in Texas state waters. And one thing that was interesting about torpedo warfare in the Gulf was it wasn't heavily advertised or discussed in the papers at the time to not create a panic. And so in addition, in Texas, we have these 2 ships, John Worthington and Oaxaca, and that were torpedoed during World War II. But off of Louisiana, there's the wreck of the U-166, the only the only U-boat archaeological site in the Gulf of Mexico. And that's a really neat site as well. There's a lot of information for that online. So John Worthington was a 470-foot-long Standard Oil tanker built in 1920 and operated between Atlantic and Gulf coasts, and it made more than 20 trips in 1942, delivering 1.7 million barrels of oil. It was traveling as part of a convoy in May of 1943 with 5 warships when it was struck by a torpedo off of Brazil. And these are just some of the images. I've read that the torpedo hole was the size of a house. So this is sort of my favorite image for the shipwreck that traveled the longest distance to make it here to Texas. So departs in May of 1943 from Rio de Janeiro, joins the convoy at San Salvador, Brazil, struck by a single torpedo from U-571 on May 28th, and then travels to Port of Spain, Trinidad for temporary repairs. And then it departs for Galveston. And if you guys know anything about the wreck of the Selma, that concrete wreck in Galveston, on its maiden voyage, it struck the jetty at Tampico, and they also brought that to Galveston for repairs. And neither vessel could be repaired, and so they left one in Galveston, and then they brought the other one here to Lydia Ann Channel. So I was giving a talk on this to a student, and they were just like, why did they keep picking Galveston? And I'm like, well, it was one of the major Gulf ports at the time. But yeah, so it arrives in June 21st at Galveston, but they're unable to repair it, and so it gets essentially towed and scuttled at Aransas Pass in April of 1944. So again, this is a 1956 General Land Office aerial photo that you can see on Google Earth. So it's about 464 feet long. So these are side scan sonar images and that Naismith Marine collected in 2014. And then what you're seeing on the right-hand side is one of the NOAA images that they provided when they were doing one of their channel surveys for the coastal charts. So with the permission of the THC, because normally we don't advertise where our archaeological sites were, this was sort of added to TPWD's kind of reef diving program. And our steward, Andy Hall, one of our volunteers, helped craft the documents for this and the drawing. And so, one of the things with our state law is we don't prohibit people from diving and visiting sites. You just can't remove anything from them. So, and I get asked that sometimes. Someone will call me up or they'll email me and they'll say, can you tell me where this wreck is so I can dive on it? With the exception of John Worthington, I can't publicize that information. So this is more information, and I just found this doing a Google search on YouTube of diving on the John Worthington in 2018. So again, I keep getting these teasers of what diving can be along the Texas Gulf, and I, again, have never seen anything like this. And this is a neat video because I don't know if it's a parent, it's a larger diver, smaller diver, and their kid, but there's scorpion fish on this wreck, which I didn't realize, and there's a point in the dive video where you can see the adult in the front pointing to it and trying to alert the other diver, because that's not something that you want to put your hand on at all when you're diving. It says only 5 feet underwater, the top of it, from the water line. So the sad thing about this particular shipwreck is it's been impacted quite a bit because of its nearness to Lydia Ann Channel, because of where it was placed. So this is the wreck in 1956. This is a wreck in 2009, and they used to have pilings around it to notify people or to kind of keep people off of it. And back in the day, ships doing commerce to Port Aransas or coming down the channel would sometimes park their barges there by using the tugs to kind of steer them into the shoreline. And that survey that was done was for the mooring facility that's now in place there. But what happened with that mooring facility, and you can't see it here, but these are all mooring dolphins, so that people can tie up their barges and so that the tugs aren't kind of running and continuously parking them there. But when those mooring dolphins were put in, and I was told this by the U.S. Army Corps, the pilings that identified the wreck to keep people off of it were removed. And essentially, this is what it looks like now. And so people are shortcutting over the wreck to get to those mooring dolphins, and they're impacting and hitting the wreck. And kind of back to Hurricane Harvey. In 2017, I received notification from a concerned citizen that when the 2 towboats and the 2 barges were wrecked during Hurricane Harvey, that one of them may have deposited itself right next to John Worthington. And it made the papers. They don't mention me directly, but if you see the Texas Historical Commission, that's who they're talking about. So this is a georeferenced sonar image and we were able to take the plot of the position of the tug, and it's right there. So I'm like, wow, that's pretty close, right? So I got to go down there. This was their command center for the Coast Guard and the General Land Office for the response. And I got to go out with the General Land Office, the owner of the tug, and a representative of the salvage company with a shipboard-mounted sonar to look and see what the proximity of the towboat was to the shipwreck itself. And you're looking at about 40 feet. And so what ended up happening, and honestly, with the storm action, I wouldn't be surprised if it hit it, you know what I mean, and just kind of bounced off of it. And so this is one of the most interesting things that I've gotten to do as far as a regulatory representative of the Texas Historical Commission is I had to sit there with the salvage company. We had to devise a direction for which the tug could be pulled so it wouldn't be pulled over the shipwreck. And then that made it into their revised salvage plan for it. And then I had to read their revised salvage plan and then sign off on it, that I approved that they weren't going to impact John Worthington by salvaging that towboat. And this is the last shipwreck in my discussion. If you're interested in learning more about these, like Wooden Ships from Texas is a really great book on the history of the wooden shipbuilding effort here. And there's stuff that you can find online, but the agency used to have a newsletter for the archaeology division that's archived, but we also have a medallion and agency newsletter, and we have quite a few articles that are for the public that I can send you on these wrecks if you're interested in learning more about them. Not for all of them, but for some of these. But that's the end of my talk, and thank you again, Cliff, for inviting me to speak.